Hey everyone, it's Matt, and today I will be talking to you about all of the video games that I played during the first quarter of 2021. That is, of course, the months of January, February, and March of 2021. And while I didn't play that many different games, I played a wide variety of different types of games. And I have some in-depth thoughts on them that I'd like to share with you. So I do hope that you'll enjoy listening to my thoughts on them. Anyway, with the introduction out of the way, let's just jump right into it. So the first game that I played this year was a little, or maybe not so little, indie game titled Hollow Knight. And if you're not already familiar with it, Hollow Knight is a 2D side-scrolling action platformer with a lot of exploration to it. It is part of the genre that many refer to as the Metroidvania. And Metroidvanias are known for mixing exploration with combat and lots of little power-ups and things you have to unlock to really explore the entirety of the map. So there's a lot of backtracking and challenging obstacles to get around. And Hollow Knight is notable particularly because a lot of people really love Hollow Knight. It has been called the best Metroidvania of all time by many people. And for a lot of people, I imagine it's one of their favorite games ever. For me, I liked it a lot, though my opinion on it is not quite as high as those opinions. Not really close even. I feel like it is a game with a lot of atmosphere to it and a great sense of exploration and danger and kind of just a really, it feels like the kind of vibe you imagine when you imagine just kind of exploring underground, kind of creepy dark areas and things like that. Because the entire game, almost the entire game, takes place underground in a series of caves. And yeah, it's got a really nice animated kind of hand-drawn art style. And it's definitely a very distinctive looking and sounding game. I can't really think of any other game that is similar to it in terms of aesthetics. As far as the gameplay goes, though, I have some mixed feelings. I like the exploration a lot, and I feel like the combat is often thrilling and fun. But at times, I feel like certain choices were made that only make the game more tedious, not necessarily more challenging or difficult in a fun way. It's clear that the designers of this game took some inspiration from games like Dark Souls, as you have mechanics like losing your currency when you die, and losing that currency permanently if you die again before you can get back to where you died. And very sparse checkpoints and save points, and just kind of a vibe of having to figure things out on your own. You're not really given many directions or instructions. And in some ways I do like these types of decisions, but in other ways I feel like they don't mesh quite so well with the overall design of Hollow Knight. And for me, I found myself a little bit annoyed while I was playing it at times. I guess just a couple of examples of what I mean. This one's fairly minor, but the game is designed in a way where your map is not automatically available. For each new area you encounter, you have to find hidden somewhere fairly well the map maker for the area. And then you have to purchase the map from him using currency that you've built up without dying, hopefully. And then once you get that map, it is only a partial map with only certain rooms showing, and the rest you have to fill out by visiting the rooms yourself. Except these rooms won't automatically appear on the map after that until you go back to a save point and save. And because save points are so infrequent and all of these requirements are really needed to get a map in the first place, it can often feel very tedious trying to remember where you're going and how to get around, because unlike games that don't rely on a map like Dark Souls, there aren't very many easily distinguishable landmarks in my opinion. Many of the areas consist of very samey looking rooms with just kind of, I don't know if arbitrarily designed is the right word for it, but just kind of platforming sections that don't really lend themselves to being easily memorizable. And so all these things add up to kind of a sense of tedium when it comes to getting around. And on top of that, to even see where you are on that map once you have it, you have to use an equipable item that takes up an equipment slot that you would otherwise want to use for other more useful things. And you can only change out your equipment at the very sparse save points, so I think you get the idea when I say it just feels a little tedious instead of challenging. To me it felt like a lot of busy work and needless focus on memorization as far as getting around goes. And even when I had the entire map to the entire game, I still could not remember how to get around without pulling it up every few seconds, so maybe I'm just stupid, or maybe it's just the kind of game that needed more obvious landmarks. I don't know. It's a tricky question, really. Maybe if there was a mini-map on the corner of the screen or something, it would be easier, but all these things are, I'm sure, carefully chosen design decisions, and they just didn't really mesh with me that well. The other example I want to describe is there are a few sections, thankfully many of them are technically optional, that have very, very, very difficult platforming challenges that are kind of in the vein of something like Super Meat Boy or Celeste, where you are bound to die many times before you find your way through it successfully. And in those games, Super Meat Boy and Celeste, those kinds of things are fine and even fun and challenging, because as soon as you die, you just respawn where you started in that room with no penalty and so on. So you don't feel like you're being punished for experimenting and practicing and so on. Whereas in Hollow Knight, you're bound to die many times in these sections, and as I mentioned earlier, when you die, not only do you start at a often very far away checkpoint, you lose all the currency you were carrying and might lose it permanently if you don't get back in time. And so it feels often like the game is presenting you with a tough challenge and then just kind of discouraging you from practicing it or attempting it, because it feels like it could just be a waste of your time going back and forth through areas you already know how to get through just to try the super precise challenge one more time. And like I said, these are all very carefully chosen design decisions, I'm sure. And when you look at games like Dark Souls, you have sometimes very similar things going on. I don't know. I know a lot of people like this game, but for me, things like that just kind of soured me on it at times. It felt like it was kind of antithetical to what would have made the game more enjoyable to me. at the end of the day, things like that were relatively minor because I still liked the game quite a bit, and I finished it. I did not finish all the optional stuff. I have no interest in doing things like the Pantheon, if you know what I mean. But yeah, overall, if that sounds like a game that might interest you, I would recommend it. It's a very good game overall, and a good value with 20 to 30 hours of content at least for $15 or $20 or however much it costs. And I'm sure it goes on sale often on things like Steam. So yeah, that would be Hollow Knight. So next, I played a game that is maybe not quite as well known, but a game that got incredibly high review scores in most places I saw. And that game is called 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim. And this is a very interesting game, a very unique game, and a game that's kind of different from what I normally play. As you can probably tell from the box art, it is a very anime style type of game. It is primarily a visual novel of sorts, though with not really many branching paths as far as I can tell. But it's also a real-time strategy game. I'd say it's maybe 70% visual novel and 30% strategy game. And it's interesting in that it's a very complex sci-fi story told from 13 different perspectives. And it really does try to cram as many sci-fi tropes as you can imagine into one sci-fi story. And if that sounds disjointed and overwhelming to you, well, that's what I was fearing at first too, but it actually blends all these things together surprisingly well. It is an enjoyable, surprisingly easy to follow, engaging sort of story with some really interesting elements to it. And I can't really get too much into details without spoilers. Unfortunately, this isn't a game that boils down to simple terms easily, but the best way I could describe it to a newcomer is like aliens invade and the people of Earth have to use giant robots to combat them. Which of course is a trope, especially in lots of Japanese sci-fi anime and so on. But yeah, this is an interesting game. I have not finished it yet though, because while I do like it, something about it has me playing in short bursts every so often, and not really addicted to it flat out. I'm not binging this game. I'll play it for an hour or two and then go a few days or weeks without playing it, but I do enjoy it through and through. A lot of people were saying the strategy elements of the game are not so great, and while they're not my favorite part, I do prefer the story parts with the visual novel stuff. It's fine if you want a fairly simple game of commanding units and defending and attacking and so on, and upgrading your abilities and so on. But yeah, this is an interesting game that blends a lot of interesting ideas I haven't seen put together in such a complex, fleshed out way. And I do like it. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would recommend 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim. Though I will say I can't quite see why the reviews are astronomically high in some places just yet, but I've read that it gets especially good in later parts of the game, and I'm maybe 6 or 7 hours in, with the game supposedly being around 30 hours or so, so I bet I'm far from those moments. But we'll see. Either way, very good game. game that a few of you might have seen me stream on Twitch, because I streamed it on Twitch across one stream. And that was Half-Life Blue Shift, one of the two main expansions for the original Half-Life from 1998. This is the shorter of the two from what I've heard, and the less well-regarded one from what I've heard, but I have always wanted to play the expansions for whatever reason. Despite being a big fan of the Half-Life games, I somehow never got around to playing either of those expansions, Blue Shift or Opposing Force, and so I started out with the shorter one. And a lot of people say this isn't a great game, but I think it's fine. It's definitely nowhere near as good as the original Half-Life, but that is to be expected for a small little expansion pack. And yeah, you basically play as one of the security guards at Black Mesa during the events of the original Half-Life game. And at the end of the day, this is really just more of what you got from the original Half-Life. Though I feel like it's not quite as polished as the original game from what I remember, but it's been a few years since I played through the original. But yeah, it's just a good mix of shooting and puzzle solving in a kind of bleak sci-fi environment. And if you like that kind of thing, you'll probably like Blue Shift, as long as you don't compare it too strictly to the original game. Would I say this is a must-play? Probably not. Nothing is particularly memorable about it for me, unlike the other Half-Life games. But it is some good extra content if you're really craving it, and it is interesting to see the events of the first game from a different perspective for sure, especially if you're a big fan of the franchise. One day I do want to go back and play Opposing Force as well, as I hear this is the much better expansion, and it is longer as far as I've seen. But yeah, overall I enjoyed Half-Life Blue Shift. And so next I played Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury. And this, as you may already know, is a re-release of Super Mario 3D World, which originally came out on the Wii U, with a few upgrades, namely that the characters move faster in this, which was kind of a complaint some people had about the original Wii U game, though it didn't really bother me that much. And on top of that, it has Bowser's Fury, which is a whole new game mode, only available in this version of the game. And so I'll give a little information on both, I guess. So Super Mario 3D World is a great 3D Mario game with kind of the level structure of the more traditional 2D Mario games, which is interesting. It feels like it is appealing to the people who like the more self-contained nature of the levels in 2D Mario games, and they prefer that over things like the open world areas where you have to find all the stars in games like Super Mario 64, Sunshine and Galaxy and Odyssey. But takes that kind of compact level design and applies the 3D Mario platforming to it. So if you like the 3D Mario platforming but wish it was more concise and bite-sized in terms of the level design, you will probably like Super Mario 3D World. This game is not quite as popular as the other 3D Mario games, I don't think, especially because it came out on the Wii U, which did not sell well, but I think it is fantastic. It is definitely up there with the other great Mario games, and I would highly recommend it for any fan of Mario or platformers in general. As for Bowser's Fury, it's kind of the opposite of that, in an interesting way. It is one big open world, a single level, but it will take you several hours to finish it. What it is it's one big open world level with a bunch of different areas and platforming sections, and you have collectibles strewn about that entire thing. And so you're going around trying to get all the collectibles, but it's called Bowser's Fury because every few minutes a gigantic, especially evil, especially scary looking Bowser awakes from his slumber and causes great destruction from afar. He'll breathe fire, shoot laser beams, destroy things, and the entire island, the area you're on, becomes a huge thunderstorm and all that. It's very dramatic and grand, if I do say so myself. And so you're trying to balance all the platforming and finding all the objects with not dying to this Bowser. And, of course, you will eventually have to defeat Bowser, but I think the way in which you do that is best unspoiled. And while Bowser's Fury is really just kind of a small add-on compared to the main game, it admittedly is the main reason I bought this. I was very curious about it, even though I own the original on Wii U, but I'm glad I got it because Bowser's Fury, while short, is very fun. And I do actually like this version of 3D World a lot more, with the faster movement speed of the characters. Like I said, I didn't hate the Wii U version's speed, but it definitely feels better at a higher speed. So, if all that sounds good to you, go play Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury. So next, I played a game that is on the opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to kid friendliness, and that is Mortal Kombat 11 Ultimate. And as the title of this game might imply, it is the 11th game in the Mortal Kombat series, and it is the so-called Ultimate Edition release, with upgrades in the graphics for the PS5, and lots of the downloadable content that has been released since the original game came out. I say lots because there are still things it does not include that you have to buy if you want them, a bunch of skins and so on. That said, I'm not going to nitpick too much because it does have a lot of extra content, and honestly, I would never use all of it anyway because I'm admittedly not a huge fan of fighting games. That said, every so often I get the urge to go buy a fighting game because I do have some fun with them. And I will say this game did scratch that itch. It does not really change my mind on fighting games when it comes to me feeling like they require too much memorization of button inputs and combos, and they can just feel kind of tedious to play, where I'm thinking more about how to control the game than I am about just enjoying it. But while it does have that issue to some degree, I find myself having a lot of fun with it nonetheless. It feels like a game that's fairly accessible for newcomers to fighting games, but also deep enough for fighting game veterans. I don't know if that's true, but it's just the impression I get. And it is full of some very, very creative content in terms of characters and level story mode is very cheesy and entertaining and just full of over-the-top action moments, which is exactly what you want from something like Mortal Kombat. And of course, the game is incredibly violent. I didn't buy it for the gore and all that, but I must admit the violence is often amusingly creative with the ways that characters perform fatalities and find clever ways to murder each other. I'm not really one to have that much of a stomach for severe violence, and while the violence in this is often very detailed and graphic, it is also so over the top and silly at times that it's hard to really take it too seriously, but I would not recommend giving this game to your young child. Definitely not. Either way, if you like fighting games, I don't think you can go wrong with this one. And even if you don't, I think you can have fun with it. Even if you're not going to get super deep into it, because I haven't, but I've still found myself having a good time when I play it. Not the kind of game I'm going to sink 100 hours into, but a game that I am glad I have nonetheless. It's always good to have a new fighting game every so often. And that was Mortal Kombat 11 Ultimate for the PlayStation 5. And finally, the last game I played in the, I almost said third quarter of 2021, we're not there yet. First quarter of 2021 was Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory. And this, as you might be able to guess from the title, is a rhythm game. Unlike the other Kingdom Hearts games, which are generally RPGs, this is not so much an RPG as a game where you are tasked with hitting various buttons in time with music. And it is all music from the Kingdom Hearts games. And really what this game is it is kind of a look back at every other Kingdom Hearts game. It contains a bunch of music from every single one, and you go through playing all these different songs and seeing random bits of cutscenes and events from the previous games. It really is just kind of a musical trip down memory lane for people who've enjoyed all the other Kingdom Hearts games. And because of that, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who's not already played all the Kingdom Hearts games, because not only does it contain spoilers for all those games, but you're not really going to get nearly as much out of it. Many of these songs aren't necessarily that enjoyable on their own without the context of knowing them from the various worlds and events of Kingdom Hearts. But yeah, when you have played the games and you recognize the music, you do form attachments between the music and your memories of the games. And so they bring back memories and emotions that you may have forgotten. It is a very familiar title, Melody of Memory. Well, not familiar, but fitting is the word I meant. But as for gameplay, I'd say this is a decent but not amazing rhythm game. Most of the levels are pretty well done and fun to play, and there's a good ramp up in difficulty between the various difficulty settings. But on occasion I felt like the placement of the notes and all that was a little wonky, and it felt like at times the game was trying to have me follow one beat or one instrument, only to switch to another instrument in the middle of that same section, and it would really throw me off and feel like in some ways I kind of have to memorize the locations of some of these things, especially because the way the game is laid out, the notes don't always approach you at the same consistent speed in a way where you can just easily guess exactly how long you have until you have to hit them. It really does rely on you having a good rhythm at times, but if the rhythm is going to change spontaneously, it needs to be a little more obvious that it's going to do that, in my opinion. But again, that's kind of a minor thing. Most of the time, it's not a big problem. And I had a lot of fun playing this. I did beat the entire thing. And overall, I'd say I enjoyed the majority of it. Unfortunately, my biggest gripe with the game, I think, is that it contains very few songs from Kingdom Hearts 3. Suspiciously few from Kingdom Hearts 3. It has what feels like practically every song from the other games, and tons of just random throwaway songs that you wouldn't really want to hear in the first place. And then you get to Kingdom Hearts 3 and it just has barely anything. And the songs it does have are all in this less common type of level format, which isn't as fun as the rest of the game. And as someone who really liked a lot of the music in Kingdom Hearts 3, and kind of preferred it to the other games at times, this was a disappointing aspect. That said, not a deal breaker, and if you like rhythm games and the Kingdom Hearts games, I don't see why you wouldn't enjoy this game on some level. I just don't really think it's quite worth the full $60, but I was able to get it for about half off, and at that price, I think it was worth it. It's a pretty good fun game, and brought back a lot of memories. So that was Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory. And that about does it.